You're listening to the Third Degree Podcast. And now, here are your hosts, Mandy Petrie and Brian J. Hatcher.
Greetings, friends, and welcome to the Third Degree Podcast. I'm Brian Hatcher. She's Mandy Petrie. And today I've got some questions.
Questions.
About questions.
To be or not to be. That is the question.
That is a question.
Whether
for sure.
'tis nobler in the mind to suffer the slings and arrows of outrageous fortune, or take arms against a sea of troubles, and by opposing end them. Die to sleep no more, to sleep to say we end the heartache of 1,000 natural shocks. Okay, I'll stop.
Shakespeare. Let me start out with a question. Have you ever heard of Ted Sturgeon, Theodore Sturgeon?
No.
He is an author. He is a genre author. He writes science fiction and fantasy. He's done some westerns, some mysteries. He's mostly known for novels like Some of Your Blood, More Than Human. He wrote some episodes of the original Star Trek series, most notably Amok Time, where we discovered that a horny Vulcan is a scary
Dangerous.
thing.
It's a dangerous thing.
Yes, that was a Ted Sturgeon script.
Aha.
I bring him up today because later on in his career, he took to signing his name with a little glyph that he also took to wearing around his neck as a piece of jewelry, which was a capital Q with a pointer arrow coming out of it. And people asked him, what's that about? And he says, it means ask the next question. And that's what I want to talk about today, because questions have been on my mind recently. Specifically because I've had questions, but we all have questions. Part of that has to do with a little box of cards that I bought a couple of weeks ago that is like an icebreaker type of a game. It's the series of cards. There are different card sets, and they're called the and cards. The purpose of them is people in particular types of relationships, friendships, family, co-workers. There's a set of cards that you can go through. You can pull out a card. It's got a question on it. You can ask each other questions. And it's supposed to help build relationships, strengthen the relationships that you already have. There actually is a set of cards that are for strangers. So if somebody you don't know, it's kind of like an icebreaker type of thing. I showed them to you and I've showed them to other people, and almost universally, the response that I've gotten about these cards have been, that's not going to strengthen a relationship. That's going to tear it apart. And
If you answer them honestly, maybe it could.
Yeah, well, that's what I found interesting. And I have been thinking about this idea about questions and answers. Are there questions that should never be asked or thought about or answered? What's the deal? I'm familiar with Martin Heidegger, the German philosopher, and one thing he always said, there was a reason why the question mark's a hook. It's a hook that hooks the questioner. And one of the things that he talked about as well is that sometimes questions can hinder a person, where if they have a question about something, if they have a doubt about something, it can make doing something, achieving something more difficult if you're questioning yourself, your ability to do it, whether you should do it. And in that mindset, something that happened some time ago between the two of us that I wanted to bring up. I remember we were getting ready to record a podcast, and I have a plaque that hangs on my wall over here that I made that has a Latin phrase on it, because being autistic, I feel like everyone should have a Latin phrase. And how terrible would it be if I didn't have a Latin phrase to put on my tombstone when I die one day? And so I have this Latin phrase that I came up with, artifex solus vere liber, which means only the artist is truly free. I remember asking you how you interpreted that saying. Do you remember what you said about it?
I have no idea, Brian. I don't know.
Well, I'll tell you what. How do you interpret that phrase?
Okay. When we think about art, we think of something that is created, a creative mind to do it. Something like, say, let's versus an art versus a science. A science has rules that you must follow, and if you don't follow these rules, the outcome will not be what you are looking for. But in art, the rules are that you're not looking for an outcome, you're looking for feelings, you're looking for reactions, you're looking for emotions. I suppose that is what we're talking about, that you're not confined to rules, only the ones that you set for yourself. That can be art in itself. There's an artist, Christo, and a lot of people don't understand his art, and I don't particularly understand it myself, but he wraps things in fabric. He'll wrap statues in fabric. He'll hang up fabric along a building's edge. He'll open up umbrellas all at the same time over the entire world at the same time. That's his art. And while the visual medium is there, the art creating it is the volunteers, the people who take their time to create this, to put it together. So I suppose that it's the fact that art is so open and interpretive, unlike other aspects in our life, sciences and the like.
When I first came up with this, one way that I looked at it, by being an artist, it allows you to put something into the world that didn't exist before you did. And because of that, rights give you freedom, and having the power to use your voice is one thing. But if you don't use that voice, then really what freedom do you have if you don't exercise that freedom? And art is the exercise of freedom. So it's a little different than how you interpreted it. So here's the question. Which one of us is right with the interpretation?
We're both right.
Now, I bring this up because when I first put that up there and asked you about the interpretation, I was curious about how you interpreted it. And at the time, there seemed to be some hesitation for you to dip into it. You were kind of like, well, I'm not exactly sure what you mean by it. And that struck me because it's like, okay, so there's a correct interpretation to this. And who came up with it? Was it me? Is there like one interpretation for that saying? And I'm the one who came up with it? Well, not particularly, obviously, because I have to say that since I've put it up there and have been thinking about it, like a lot of good sayings, I've reinterpreted it to some degree. I've rethought it out to some degree. And to me now, part of what it means to me is that for those who do not exercise their creativity, what do you have in life? It's like you go to the job, you do your work, whether you like it or not, because you need money to eat on, and then you come home and you have a beer or maybe a whiskey and you watch TV until you get tired and you go to bed, and then you get up the next day and do the same thing. If you don't have something of yourself that you can put yourself into, that's a prison.
It's very Voltaire of you, Brian, because I was just sitting here thinking about different interpretations of art and the like. And one thing that I'll always bring up is the difference between Annabelle Lee and Casey at the Bat. They're both very important American poems.
Right.
Both tragic American poems, but very, very different.
Yes.
But they're both very, very important. And that's one of the things that your art is different. It doesn't mean it's not important, and it doesn't mean it doesn't deserve to be studied.
Yeah. And like I said, as I've thought about this, how I've come to interpret that saying has changed to some degree. Continuing to think about that as a phrase, even though it's a phrase that I came up with, but seeing how I could perhaps reinterpret it to see how, as I get older, how I look at that phrase and how I would interpret it as time goes along is interesting to me. This is part of the danger of the question. And we can start dipping a little bit into metaphysics because, hey, why not? Let's have some fun with some light philosophy. But
light philosophy. There's a little light philosophy.
Just a little bit of light philosophy.
For your Thursday.
But metaphysics is the study of knowledge and the study of the utility of knowledge and how we come to know things. And what does it mean to know things? What is truth? That has weighed into this thinking that I've been doing about questions and asking questions and seeking answers to questions. And this is something we picked up from years of public school. The questions that we are confronted with in school, there are a bunch of ways you can answer those questions, but there's only one that's going to get you the check mark on the test. Mm-hmm. All the other ones get you a big red X and cost you 2 points on your score. So questions have one answer, empirically a correct answer, and all the other possible answers that you could come up with for that question are just really just different degrees of not the right answer. And I feel like sometimes we look at questions as that black and white thing. There's only two ways you can answer a question: by giving the right answer or giving the wrong answer. And then you bring metaphysics into it and this idea of answering a question. And part of metaphysics teaches us how you answer a question has a lot more to do with you than necessarily the question itself. Because just asking a question carries a whole bunch of baggage with it. Because, first of all, to ask a question means that the answer is important. It means that there is an empirical value to the answer, that the answer is important, and that there is a moral imperative for that answer to be truthful and honest. And with that much baggage attached to a question, it's no wonder that we're scared of them so much. Questions can be a scary thing. And I will give you the best example of that I can think of right now. Many, many years ago when I was in high school, 1984, I believe, I was down in Charleston, West Virginia. My Uncle Jerry was up in Chicago, Illinois. And he was faced with a question. He was suffering some chest pains. And the question he had to face was, am I having a heart attack? And that's a horrible question, because who wants to have a heart attack? No one does. It's a pretty horrible thing to think that would be happening to you. And his choice in that situation was, well, let me lie down, and if I wake up and the pain's gone, then it's not a question I have to answer, because obviously that's not what's going on. But if I take a nap and the pain doesn't go away, then I guess I'll face that question. I'll go to the hospital. But he didn't wake up.
Yeah.
He was 42 when that happened. And when I became 42, I was going to the gym and trying to lose weight. And I noticed working out that I was getting more tired than I normally did. And I noticed walking around the mall, climbing a set of stairs, got to be like really difficult for me. And I was starting to feel chest pains. And suddenly I was faced with the same question. And I said, well, I'm probably not having a heart attack. Let me just go to a doctor, because I knew I was a very bad hypochondriac. And especially with what happened to my uncle.
Yep.
It's like, that's going to be front of mind. So I'm like, let's just go to the doctor. Let them say, okay, you're getting carried away. Maybe I have indigestion or whatever. We can do something about it. But let's get that thought out of my head, because a year previous, I was feeling chest pains, went to the doctor.
Nothing was wrong.
And nothing was wrong. And so, okay, fine. Let's go back. I know it's going to be silly, but let's just get that done. And so I can stop worrying about it. Of course, in that situation, I was having a heart attack.
Yeah.
And we had to put in a couple of stents.
Yep.
So if I had ignored it, eventually it would have killed me. But that was the place where a question, as horrible as it was, I needed to answer. There is also this idea that all questions must be answered. And I wonder if that's true, because rather recently, there have been two situations in my life where I have been faced with this concept that there is a question that is being left unanswered, that is being avoided. And in one of these situations, it was a question that I feel like should have been faced, and wound up having to answer this question in probably the worst circumstance possible. In the other situation, it was a question that I'm probably going to wind up taking with me to the grave, because asking the question for me, I don't feel is going to do anything but harm people that mean something to me. And so I'm just going to hold on to that. I'm not going to say on this podcast what either one of those questions are, because there are other people involved, and my worry is different people may or may not hear this podcast. Talking about it would hurt them. Universally, in both situations, there would be people who would get hurt for me talking about them. So I'm not going to. But here we are with this idea of questions and answers. And if you have a question, should you seek an answer for it? This concept, obviously, that living a truthful life is important. You've seen all the videos on YouTube of speaking my truth. Are you, though? Are you really speaking your truth? Are you speaking your opinion? You're speaking your perception of what happened. And as someone who has studied enough physics and cosmology and astronomy to know that perception is a really tricky thing, even under the best of circumstances, and knowing that there are situations like the uncertainty principle, where once you observe a situation, you have basically changed it. You've changed it.
Yeah.
And add on top of that rejection sensitivity dysphoria and misinterpreting situations. And so knowing that my perceptions are flawed, even under the best of situations, what is the truth? What is the right answer? And
Well, there is a difference between truth and facts. Indiana Jones says, you're not going to find truth here. In archaeology, we search for facts. If you want truth, you get it on the philosophy. I do think there are questions that don't need to be answered. One example is people doing DNA tests and finding out things that they didn't want to find out, and it only ended up hurting them. Your truth is that this is your family. This is who you love. These people here are your family. And no matter what a DNA test says, that doesn't change that fact. Know that you love these people. If you're not genetically related to them, that's who you love. That's your family. And getting that DNA test and finding out something different is just going to end up hurting you. That's your truth. It may not be the facts, but that's your truth. This is your family.
it's funny that you use that as an example because, and again, I wonder how deeply I can go into this, but I took a DNA test. And because of that, 2 really ugly truths came out.
Oh.
Yeah.
Mm.
So I know exactly what you're talking about because it happened to me. Again, this is one of those situations where I'm like, I don't know how much of this I really should say because, again, people will get hurt if I talk about it. But yeah, there are a couple of really ugly realities hit me dead in the face because of this one, what I thought was innocuous DNA test.
Oh, let's have fun. Let's find out if we're Scottish. Let's find out if we're French. And that's not.
Yeah, exactly. It got to be a little bit more complicated. But then again, you go back to this idea of speaking truth. Like Oliver Wendell Holmes said, truth is like bread. It nourishes us. It gives us life. But no one has the right to take a loaf of bread and shove it down another man's throat. And at the same time, I feel like, and I think we all do, this idea that the questions that I have, that I should seek out empirically what the truth is of what I don't know. And I should wish to face those questions that I have about myself and other people. And it's easy to spout out this belief that knowing the truth about any situation is your best bet.
Nope, absolutely not. I will happily remain ignorant if I can be happy about it. If it's not hurting me or anyone else.
I will say this specifically. There are some truths that I have faced about myself. There have been questions, uncomfortable questions that I have asked about myself, but I did it with the help of a therapist. I truly believe there are some questions about yourself that you shouldn't try to face alone because we all have those little places that we go into denial about stuff, and it's not always for a bad reason. If you've gone through a traumatic experience, if you have PTSD over something, if something terrible happened to you when you were young, which happened to me a bunch, that's happened to a lot of people, that's not something you should just go digging up on your own. This is definitely something you need to deal with help. And yes, you should look for those answers, just not alone. And there are a lot of these so-called truisms about asking questions and getting answers and knowing yourself and knowing your truth and knowing the real you and living authentically. And I feel like that type of philosophy that you're going to see in a lot of so-called self-help is ultimately non-productive and possibly self-destructive because you can't apply that universally. There are some truths that you should seek out. There are some questions about yourself and people that you're around that you should definitely ask those questions. There are other questions that you should ask with the help of other people. And there are some questions that just need to stay where they are. And getting the answers to them aren't going to be any help at all. They're just going to make things worse.
Yep.
And I've definitely seen all of those situations in the long, long years that I have lived. There have been, for me, those moments where I've had to deal with all three of those kinds of questions and are still dealing with them. And I do feel that this idea of the sanctity of the truth, the holiness of the truth, doesn't really pan out in the real world. I'm not saying lying for the sake of lying is necessarily a good thing, but there, of course, is this saying, this philosophy about truth is that it's not enough to speak the truth. Is it useful? Is it helpful? Is it something that the person hearing that truth is going to be able to listen to and accept? All of that plays into it as well. Another good example is in AA, they talk about making restitution to people that you've hurt while you were under the influence, that you should go and seek out people that you hurt when you were an alcoholic, when you were in addiction, and make some restitution. Let them know that you're sorry. Unless, of course, this is somebody that you've hurt so bad that you appearing on their doorstep after a whole bunch of years is just going to bring all that stuff back.
Yep.
Perhaps you don't get closure by saying you're sorry, but then they don't get hurt by seeing you again, especially if it's a situation where how many times did you apologize and went back to it? Why put them through that again? And so wanting to speak your truth is not going to be useful in that situation, obviously.
To accept the things I cannot change, the strength to change the things that I can, and the wisdom to know the difference.
And I think a solid philosophy based on that is, in the end, more useful than this feel good, seek out the truth, be your authentic, honest self. For me, as someone who's autistic, I put on masks all the time for everybody. And this truism would be basically say, hey, don't put on masks for people. If you can't take me at my worst, you don't deserve me at my best.
But
no.
You can give them your best some of the time.
Yeah, exactly. There have been moments when the mask has slipped, but I've never been totally mask off around anybody. And I don't think that's a terrible, horrible thing. And nobody should feel bad if I'm doing any kind of masking around somebody. This is what allows me to communicate with people. It doesn't mean I'm lying to anybody. It's like hanging out with your friends at the bar. You don't act the same way as you do hanging out with your coworkers at work, or at least you better not. Hopefully not, or else you're probably going to wind up getting fired. But we all have a code of conduct for our relationships. And would it be nice if there was at least one person somewhere in my life where I could just be completely mask off and not have to worry about it? I suppose so. This would have to be somebody who I'm deeply in a relationship with and somebody that I trust. That's the other thing, too, that I've noticed about this idea of the authentic self is that, especially after COVID, this idea of going online and just revealing so much stuff about yourself, the TMI, I've seen a lot of that happen.
We listen and we don't judge.
Right. But also, it's built into our brain not only to find answers for questions, but also to make ourselves vulnerable to build relationship. And again, going back to the relationship cards, the icebreaker questions, that's part of what that's supposed to do. It's supposed to allow us to build connections with each other by being more open, being more vulnerable. That can be very difficult to do because obviously when you make yourself vulnerable, you make it possible for you to get hurt. And there have been situations where I've made myself vulnerable and I've gotten hurt for it. And because of that, I've turned around and went, okay, well, you're somebody I can't talk to anymore on a deep personal level. And there are people in my life, certainly, that I do feel like I can be forthcoming to some things, certainly. I don't feel that it would be advantageous to be like 100% truthful, dumping my life on people Who wants that? And I certainly am not obligated to anyone else's truth, even if it's something about me. There's that saying, whatever you think about me is not my business. There's an awful lot of truth in that. We all have to learn about what truth is valuable, what living authentically really means, realizing that we are not owed the truth, whatever that is, and depending how far you want to get into science and philosophy, just how truthful truth actually can be, how much of it is truth, how much of it is just your perception of what happened. But also, there are questions that should not be answered alone, that you need people to be with you and to help you through it. But at the end of the day, you have to decide when it is time to ask the next question. And so with that, we come to the end of this podcast. Thank you for listening. And until next time, remember, you don't have to make a leap of faith. You just have to move 1 degree.
Thanks for listening to the Third Degree Podcast. Please remember, the opinions expressed in this podcast are those of the hosts and do not necessarily reflect the views of any affiliated organizations. The content provided is for informational and entertainment purposes only. Any